let's get started. As you know that in the last leg of this course we're looking at some applications, some devices that are based upon quantum effects. Today we're going to look at the ubiquitous transistor. As we know that the transistor is the lifeline of modern electronics. All of modern electronics, microprocessors, digital circuits, analog circuits, all of the computation we do, all of the communication we do is reliant solely and wholly on this device, which is called a transistor. It was invented in 1947 by Bardeen, by Shockley and Bardeen, for which they won the 1956 Nobel Prize in Physics. So there are different variants of transistors. So these transistors act like switches. They can be turned on and off. They can act like amplifiers, which convert a feeble, weak signal into a large signal. And there are different kinds of transistors. The one that we're going to discuss are called FETs. And these FETs stand for field effect transistors. Specifically, we'll look at MOSFETs. Where MOS stands for metal oxide semiconductor. Now, how is a MOSFET built? The MOSFET is built in the following fashion. We have a slab or a wafer or a chip or a crystal of silicon. Now silicon is a group 4 element in the periodic table and it's a semiconductor. Do all of you know what semiconductors are? So a semiconductor is basically, it can be described in different ways. If I have electrons inside a solid, we know that the energy levels, they are quantized because the electron is now confined within the boundary of the solid. So this is our solid material and we have electrons inside the solid. And these are free electrons. They are roaming about in the absence of an electric field randomly. And there is a positive core, which is a series of positively charged ions that are regularly spaced because we have a crystal. They are periodically arranged, in other words. So this yellow sea of electrons are a bunch of free electrons. They are delocalized and they are confined within the boundary of this metal or solid or semiconductor. So their energy is going to be quantized. Okay. So now what happens in a solid is that these energy levels bunch up in what are called bands. So you have a bunch of energy levels and a very large number of them. I cannot do justice by drawing all of them because they run into millions or billions or even more. And then I have another bunch of energy levels. And so it happens is that one bunch of energy levels is separated from another bunch of energy levels by a gap. Now this gap is a forbidden gap. It's called an energy gap. and the electrons can fill up these levels and there could be no more than 2 electrons per level because of the Pauli exclusion principle. And if one band is completely filled and then there is an intervening gap and the upper band is completely empty, then such a solid is called an insulator. Now this band is called the valence band, and this band which is above the energy gap is called the conduction band. So electrons that are inside the valence band, they are bound to the positively charged ionic cores and they cannot move, they are not labile. So these electrons, the green electrons which are bound to the positively charged ionic cores, they cannot contribute to conduction. You apply an electric field, only the yellow electrons can move because they are mobile. And the green electrons which are bound to the positively charged ionic cores, they are fixed. They cannot move. So they belong to the valence band, whereas the yellow electrons, if they exist, they belong to the conduction band. Now if you have a scenario in which the valence band is completely filled, then there is an energy gap and there are no electrons in the conduction band, then this situation represents an insulator. Because if you apply an electric field, E, the energy of the electron is raised, and if E is the electric field, the energy of the electron is raised by small e times E. But if this small e times E is smaller than the energy gap Eg, where this is the energy gap, then electrons cannot be promoted to the conduction band, and hence no conduction can take place because there are no conduction electrons. Okay? So this is an example of an insulator. And another way of drawing an insulator, a simplified way, is in the following fashion. I just draw a valence band, a conduction band, separate these by an energy gap, and the valence band is completely filled. I draw it with a shaded disposition. So this is a completely filled band, and a completely empty conduction band represents an insulator. If I reduce this gap a little bit, so in typical insulators, this gap is of the order of, is greater than about 4 or 5 electron volts. If I reduce this gap, I get what is called a semiconductor. So in a semiconductor, I have a valence band and a conduction band and a small gap Eg, and this gap could be of the order of an electron volt or 2 electron volts. So at 0 kelvins, the valence band is completely filled, the conduction band is empty, but this gap is very small. So if I have an electron at the top of the valence band and I give it energy, somehow I give it energy, it can jump over this forbidden region and get into the conduction band. Now how can I provide this energy? This energy can be provided by an incoming photon. A photon can come in of energy hf, which is larger than the band gap, and it can promote the electron to the conduction band. So once this electron has gone into the conduction band, it becomes a free electron and it can contribute to conductivity. Another way of promoting this electron is by increasing the thermal energy of the solid. So thermal energy provides you an energy kBT, and if this thermal energy kBT is greater than the band gap, an electron can be promoted to the conduction band. And since the solid as a whole is electrically neutral, once an electron has been promoted from the valence band to the conduction band, a vacancy is created in the valence band. And this vacancy is called a hole. So this hole can be treated as a positively charged particle, and the electron can be treated as a negatively charged particle. Both of these contribute to conduction. So this is basically what a semiconductor material is. So you can provide it with enough temperature so that the electrons are promoted, and room temperature is sufficiently high. At room temperature you can have enough promotion of electrons from the valence band to the conduction band. So the main difference between insulators and semiconductors is that if you increase the temperature, what would happen? What do you expect happens to the conductivity of a semiconductor? The conductivity goes up. Whereas for an insulator, if you increase the temperature, the conductivity goes down. Now with this lightning introduction, flash lightning introduction in fact to semiconductors, I would now move on to a transistor. G. The photons could come from a laser source, they could come from light. You could think of any source of photons, but they must have the right frequency. That frequency has to overcome the energy gap. And if an electron in the conduction band falls into the hole in the valence band, it can fill up or plug this hole. And when it plugs the hole, a photon has to be emitted because energy has to be conserved. And that is the working principle of an LED, of a light emitting diode. And light that falls on a semiconductor material and causes promotion of the electrons from the valence to the conduction band is the working principle of a solar cell. This is how a solar cell works, G. So an insulator, somehow if you promote the electrons, and some insulators will have some conductivity because some of the electrons do exist in the conduction band. You can cross this gap as well. For metals and insulators, they have the same behavior of conductivity versus temperature. If the temperature goes up, the conductivity goes down. And why does the conductivity go down? Because the ionic vibrations increase. When the ionic vibrations increase, the flow of electrons is met with a higher impedance. Now let's move on to a transistor. What a MOSFET is made up of is a chip, a crystal of silicon. A silicon is a very abundant element in the Earth's crust. About, I think, 25% of the Earth's crust is made up of silicon, I think. And silicon is the purest element that is known to mankind, because the electronics industry has perfected in the art of making pure silicon. Now you can make silicon which is so pure that you have less than one impurity atom in 10 raised to power 8 silicon atoms. So you have 100 million silicon atoms arranged in a perfectly ordered periodic arrangement, and you only have one impurity atom amongst those 100 million silicon atoms. You can make perfectly pure, clean, pristine silicon crystals in clean rooms. Okay? So this is such a crystal, and on top of this crystal you deposit some metal electrodes, a couple of them. Generally these are made up of gold. So you deposit metal electrodes. And why do you have metal electrodes? Because if you have some transistor or electronic device, you would like to make electrical connections to it. You would like to pass a current through it or measure some voltage. So this device has to talk to its outside world, and those communications take place through what are called electrodes. So these are gold electrodes so that you can make nice connections with wires, or these wires can connect to other transistors inside the chip. These wires are also called interconnects. One of these electrodes is called a source and the other is called a drain. On top of this silicon, you have a metal oxide, which is an insulator. Silicon is a semiconductor. These electrodes, they are metallic, they are conductors. This is an insulator, a metal oxide. For example, silicon dioxide, silica. Silica is just sand. It's pure silica. So you have a metal oxide layer, and on top of this layer, you have another electrode. And you have an interconnect, and this electrode is called the gate. Now this insulating layer is very thin, and this insulating layer, its thickness generally determines what kind of technology you're talking about. So you have 0.14 micron technology, which means it's an Intel technology, which means that this typical thickness is about 140 nanometers in 0.14 micron technology. In 0.1 micron technology, it's going to be typically 100 nanometers. You could go even smaller. It could be 5 nanometers, 10 nanometers, 15, 20, 30 nanometers. So that defines the technology which is currently prevalent in the industry. So this is a thin insulating layer, which means that classically no electron can go from the gate to the silicon, and no electron can go from the silicon to the gate, classically. Now, this entire device is kept at room temperature because you would like to make your transistors work at room temperature. So, what you do is you have free electrons in the silicon because electrons have been promoted by thermal energy to the conduction band. So you have electrons and holes inside the silicon. So if I just make the holes, the electrons, these electrons are spread out in the silicon, they are dispersed. Now, higher the temperature, higher will be the concentration of these electrons. Higher will be the density of these free electrons. Agreed? Because higher temperature means higher promotion to the conduction band. More electrons will be promoted to the conduction band. So, these electrons are dispersed inside the bulk of the silicon. Now, what you do is you apply a voltage source to the source. Suppose you apply a negative voltage to the source. And to the drain you apply a positive voltage. So this ground terminal means that this point is connected to this point. Okay? Are you familiar with these circuit diagrams? Alright. So you have a battery. Now, what should happen is that electrons should flow from the source to the drain through this silicon wafer. But electrons exist inside the source electrode because this is a negatively charged terminal of the battery, so you would have electrons here. So you have electrons in the source material, in the source electrode, but can these electrons flow through the silicon and reach the drain and make up a current? No, they cannot, because how would these electrons jump into the semiconductor? And you need to have a free flow of electrons through the silicon. If this potential difference is high enough, of course you can make the electrons go into the silicon, but then the whole wafer will be damaged. So this is a situation in which no conduction of electrical current takes place, because the electrons in the silicon, they are dispersed inside the bulk of the crystal, and not enough electrons are present in this path to make conduction possible. So this transistor is said to be in the off state if you have such a scenario. Now we would like to turn the transistor on, which means that we would like to make the transistor conductor. Now how do we do that? Now what you would like to do is you would like to apply a positive potential to this gate. So this is your gate, and you apply a voltage to the gate, say about 10 volts, which of course is positive. You've applied a potential difference across the source and the drain already. Now what this positive gate potential is going to do, please be attentive and please don't talk. The deadline for submitting the homework I think is over. Please relax. So if you have this gate voltage, it's positively charged, what will it do to these electrons that are dispersed inside the silicon? आप बताओ electrons को क्या होगा? They will be attracted. So these electrons will be attracted towards the top of this wafer. So all of the electrons, or almost all of them, will be brought into the vicinity of the gate. Some electrons of course will remain here, but a large number of electrons will be attracted towards this region between the source and the drain. Now, free electrons are already available in the source electrode. Now what's going to happen is that these electrons will repel these electrons, and a flow of electrons will take place from the source to the drain. A channel has opened up in the region between the source and the drain, a conduction channel. So this is a conduction channel, and through this conduction channel the flow of electrons takes place. So electrons flow from the source to the drain, they move into this circuit, and if you have an ammeter here or a microammeter, it will register a current. And when the electrons have been depleted from the source, more electrons will be pulled in because you have a battery connected to the source. So a flow of electrons will take place between the source and the drain, and that flow has been promoted just because we've applied a positive potential to the gate. So by switching on and off the gate voltage, you can turn the transistor on or off. And this voltage practically can be about 1 to 2 volts. A very small voltage can turn the gate on, turn the transistor on. So the transistor is acting like a switch, and the gate is in fact controlling the switch, whether the transistor is on or the transistor is off. So in 1970, when these integrated circuits were first made, there were about 10 million electrons that switched the transistor, which means that about 10 million electrons, would be there on the gate and will cause the promotion of a conduction channel and will turn the transistor on. Nowadays, in about 2013, about 5 to 10,000 electrons are able to make the transistor go on. So the number of electrons that are resident on the gate, if you apply a positive potential to the gate, it means that you are pulling electrons out of the gate. Agreed? If you apply a positive potential to the gate, you are pulling electrons out of the gate because the potential on the gate is positive. So in 1970, about 10 million electrons were pulled out of the gate. Nowadays, about 5 to 10,000 electrons are pulled out of the gate. So the number of electrons that are controlling the switching of your transistor, they are reducing day by day. You used to have 10 million electrons controlling your devices. Now you have a few thousand electrons controlling your devices. So you have fewer electrons, you have smaller power dissipation. You have faster operation. And you have smaller devices or miniaturization. And when you have smaller devices, you can pack more and more transistors into a unit area of your chip. Currently, a microprocessor chip, which is about 1 inch square. Excuse me, that kya ho gaya? What's your problem? Is there any problem? Currently, you have a microprocessor chip which is about 1 inch squared in size, and you have 100 million transistors in that 1 inch square of chip, and each transistor is switching on and off 100 million times per second. So if you have a frequency of about 1 to 10 gigahertz, if that's your clock speed, so you have 100 million transistors in a small, packed up in a small region, say 1 inch square, and each transistor is turning on and off 100 million times per second. So you have a very high power dissipation because the switching is on off at tremendously high speeds, and you have a huge packing density. Now if you would like to make 100 million electrons or 10 million electrons control each transistor, then you're doomed, because then the flow of electrons is going to go exorbitantly high, and then the power dissipation is going to go exorbitantly high, and your microprocessor or your device is going to heat up very quickly. But you would like to reduce the power, so you would like fewer and fewer electrons to control your transistor, and that is where quantum mechanics comes to your rescue. Because as you know, quantum mechanics helps you deal with single electrons or single photons in one go. So quickly let me tell you a variant of this transistor, and a variant that is used as a memory cell, and it's called a flash memory cell. For example, this is the memory cell that is used in USB flash drives, is used in cameras, it's the smart digital memory that is used in many other devices. So the flash memory cell is very similar to a MOSFET. Again, you have a silicon crystal, you have source and drain, S and D, you have an insulating layer, a metal oxide. On top of it you have another electrode. Then you have another insulating layer. And on top of it you have another electrode. So now instead of one electrode in this region, you have two electrodes. Excuse me, can you please go out of the class? I'm not allowed to take the quiz today. So instead of one electrode, you have two electrodes in the region close to the source and the drain. The top electrode is called the gate electrode, and you apply a voltage VG to it. This bottom electrode is called a floating electrode. So what's going to happen is, again you apply a potential to the source and the drain. You have free electrons everywhere inside the silicon crystal. You apply a gate voltage that is positive. These free electrons are brought into this region between the source and the drain. They open up a channel, a conduction channel, which is called an N channel, and conduction takes place. So these electrons are attracted to this region. A channel is formed. The conduction of electrons takes place inside this channel, and when the conduction of electrons, there is a high preponderance, there is a large number or a large density of electrons in this region. Now there is a small insulating layer, which is the metal oxide layer. Now this high density of electrons is such that electrons can have an urge to tunnel across this insulating layer and reach the floating electrode, because this layer is very thin. So these electrons that have been brought into the vicinity of the source and the drain have now a tendency to tunnel into the gate, into the floating electrode. So when electrons tunnel and they move into the floating electrode, this floating electrode acquires a negative charge. And why is there a tendency for the electrons to go from the silicon to the floating electrode? That's because this gate is at a positive potential, so electrons are being attracted from the silicon towards the gate. So the tunneling current will flow from the silicon towards the floating electrode. Once you turn off the gate voltage, once the gate voltage is turned off, the current ceases, the current goes away, the conduction current goes away, and what happens to the electrons in the floating electrode? The electrons will stay. Alright? Because there is no reason why these electrons can go back to the silicon. They can of course tunnel back, but the inclination is very poor because the electrons really need an urge to tunnel back. The electrons can tunnel from the N channel towards the towards the floating electrode, and they can tunnel from the floating electrodes towards the n channel. And there is no tendency or favorability for the electrons to tunnel back from the floating electrode to the silicon. So once this operation has been carried out, a negative potential arises on the floating electrode, and we say that we've written something onto the memory cell. This memory cell has gone into a state high, or we have written a bit onto the memory cell. So if you have a memory cell, a register of many bits, you can write and retrieve data or erase data from it. So now what we've done is we've written something onto the memory cell, and that writing process has been promoted by quantum mechanical tunneling. So this is the write operation in a flash memory cell. By the way, I don't think I'm going to take a quiz today. Thank you. There's no quiz, so the average of your marks will be added to the 7 quiz. So this is the write operation in a flash memory cell. Now we've seen that a quantum mechanical phenomenon, the phenomenon of quantum mechanical tunneling, has led to the operation of a flash memory cell. Now the good thing about flash memories is that they are non-volatile. You know what's the meaning of non-volatile? क्या मतलब non-volatile? सर क्या मतलब? Volatile का क्या मतलब? Alright. What's the meaning of volatility in English language? That's chemistry. That's something that is unstable. So the flash memory is a non-volatile device, which means you turn off the power. Turn off the power, which means the gate voltage goes to 0. When the gate voltage goes to 0, the current, this voltage is also turned off. The electrons will remain on the floating electrode. And when the electrons remain on the floating electrode, the memory state of this cell is preserved. So turning off the power does not change the state of this memory cell. So it's a non-volatile memory. You turn off the power, the memory remains there. So it's like a ROM. A ROM means something which is non-volatile. You have a ROM chip inside your computer. You turn off the memory, you turn off the power, the memory stays there. How do you boot the system? How does the system start up? That does not depend upon whether you supply power to your computer or not. Every time the computer boots up, it retrieves the memory that has been programmed into the ROM. So the ROM is non-volatile. Likewise, flash memory cells are non-volatile. And they're very easy to make. The structure of this cell is not complicated from a microelectronics perspective. And they're based upon quantum mechanical tunneling, as you can see. Hard device, hard disks, the way they read information, that is also based upon quantum mechanical tunneling. So we've been able to write something onto the memory cell. How can we erase this information? So the flash is basically an EEPROM, electrically erasable, programmable read-only memory. It's electrically erasable. You can also erase this information because once you set your flash memory cell to a memory state, you do not want to make that be written in stone. You would like to erase that information and put something new. So how do you erase information from a flash memory cell? You can erase that information by simply making this go to 0 and you apply a positive potential here, and this is open. You do not connect the source. So what happens is that these electrons will now tunnel out of the floating electrode and go into the silicon channel and go out through the drain. So you apply a positive potential to the drain and make the gate voltage 0 or negative. And these electrons that have been trapped into this prison because of tunneling can now tunnel out of the floating electrode. And this is how you can erase the information that has been stored in the memory cell. Okay, so you can write and you can also erase information in a memory cell. Now I would like to take you to the culmination of the transistor, the apex of this transistor, the ultimate form of the transistor that I have mentioned above. And this, by the way, is the workhorse of modern electronics. All modern electronics, microelectronic circuits use MOSFETs and transistors basically of this kind. Now my goal is to show you that even with a single electron, you can make a transistor go on and off, on and off, on and off. So that has to be really the ultimate test of quantum mechanics. It cannot be better. So what I'm going to tell you about is now a single electron transistor. G. How do we control? How do we write such information? So we know the write operation. For example, what's going to happen is that you have a large number of memory cells in series, and their gate interconnects are available. So whatever information you would like to write, for example, you would like to write 1 1 1 1 0 0 0 1. It's a byte, right? And you would like to write this information on 8 flash memory cells. So you put a 1 on the first one, a 1 on the second one, a 1 on the third one. So this will be a word line, and this will be a byte line. So you flow current through the flash memory cells, and they will flow in series, whereas you will put your control signal onto the gate voltage. And this is how you can write information. Vakar also had a question. वापस आने की So you can control those tunneling probabilities by changing the height of the barrier. Here the height of the barrier, if you would like to make electrons tunnel into the floating electrode, the height of the barrier is reduced because you apply a positive potential to the gate. So the barrier slopes downwards. So by controlling the barrier shape and height, you can control whether you have a substantial probability of tunneling or you would have minuscule probability of tunneling. Okay? So that is controlled by the gate voltage. Now what we are going to look at a single electron transistor, which are the culmination of what we've learned so far. Once again, our MOSFET, our source, our drain, our metal oxide insulating layer, our gate. Apply VG here, you apply some source voltage here, Vs, and you apply some drain voltage here, V. Alright, now in a single electron transistor, what you have is basically, this is silicon, it's semiconducting, it's not metallic, and then you place a quantum dot here. Now, as you know, what's a quantum dot? What is a quantum dot? It's a nanoparticle. It could be a nanoparticle of very small dimensions. And what's the property of a quantum dot? What about the energy levels of the electrons inside a quantum dot? They are quantized. So what you do is you put a small nanoparticle or a quantum dot or an island of semiconducting material inside this ocean of another semiconducting material. But this is like an oasis in a desert. So if electrons are on site or on the quantum dot, their energies have to be quantized. Okay, we know that. Now we rely on tunneling between the source of electrons, between the source and the quantum dot, and between the quantum dot and the drain electrode. Now we have to fight against unwanted tunneling as well. So what we would really like to do is we would like to put one electron on the quantum dot. So you have conduction just by one electron. Okay, so now you would like to have conduction just by one electron, and with a very small number of electrons that are applied to the gate. What is more important is that the number of electrons that constitute the current, they are very small. So you just have, say, one electron that constitutes a current. So current generally becomes like rain on a tin roof, in which you have a house in which there is a roof made up of tin, and you can hear those individual droplets of rain falling onto the roof. So current becomes quantized itself. So you would like current to be quantized. And you can achieve that because your electrons, your charge is quantized. So you would like to have one electron making up your current. Just one electron giving you a current. One electron flows, it means current is flowing. One electron doesn't flow, it means the transistor is off. So that's what your goal is. So somehow these electrons tunnel into the quantum dot and tunnel out of the quantum dot. They have to tunnel because this is largely an insulating or a semiconducting region which does not allow electrons to freely flow. But you would like to have tunneling on purpose. Tunneling on purpose. Which means you do not want unwanted tunneling. Okay? Just to give you an example, suppose you have a theatre playing a very important play, or a drama is taking place. You would like only the people who have the appropriate ticket or the pass to enter the theatre and watch the play. You do not like unwanted people to come in, or people who have not purchased your pass. So exactly the same situation applies here. You would like tunneling to be on purpose. If one electron goes into the quantum dot through tunneling, you would like to choose when that electron goes in and whether the electron goes in. You would like to control your tunneling into and out of the quantum dot. In order to control this tunneling, you would have to have two conditions. First, remember that if this quantum dot is neutral, what's the electrostatic energy of the quantum dot? 0. Now, if you put an electron onto the quantum dot, you put one electron onto the quantum dot, now I'm representing the electron by a pink circle. And then you would like to put in another electron into the quantum dot. Is it easier for the second electron to go in to the quantum dot. Why? Because the electron that's already there is going to repel the electron. So this is prized real estate. The quantum dot is prized real estate for the electrons, and you cannot cram in many electrons into this real estate, because one electron comes in, it would try to push apart or repel other incoming electrons. So this is really prized real estate for the electrons, which means that if you add a single electron to the quantum dot, its energy goes up. Okay? In other words, if this quantum dot were to act like a capacitor of capacitance C dot, and it had a single electron on it, could you please tell me what the electrostatic energy of this quantum dot is going to be? Electrostatic energy, which is also called the charging energy, is given by the charge on this capacitor. It's like a capacitor. Capacitor doesn't have to be parallel plate. Capacitor is something that can store charge. So this quantum dot can store electrons, so it acts like a capacitor. So this charging energy of a capacitor is just going to be the charge stored on the capacitor squared. In our case, we have an electron stored on the capacitor, so it's going to be E squared over 2 times the capacitance of the dot. So this is the charging energy of the electron. If you put an electron onto the quantum dot, its energy goes up by this much. So this increase in energy will prevent the flow of further electrons. Okay? So this increase in charging energy acts like a potential barrier. This effect is called Coulomb blockade. Coulomb blockade means that if you have an electron already on the quantum dot, it becomes more difficult to add a second electron. If you have 2 electrons on the quantum dot, it becomes more difficult to add a third electron. 3 electrons on the quantum dot, it's exceedingly difficult to add a 4th one, because you're cramming in mutually repelling electrons onto small real estate. That's not possible. Okay. So the charging energy goes up. Now what you would like to do is you would like that electrons cannot easily cross this Coulomb blockade, this Coulomb barrier. If you have a large enough temperature, then electrons from the source can tunnel into the quantum dot, and electrons from the silicon can tunnel into the quantum dot. So you would like to have the temperature to be small enough so that this barrier is not crossed. Remember, there will be no tutorials or recitations on this stuff, so these questions are directly asked in the final exam. So you have to be very attentive, please. So what you would like to do is you would like to have the temperature small enough that the thermal energy of the electrons is not sufficient to overcome this barrier. So your first condition is that the thermal energy of the electrons has to be smaller than the Coulomb blockade. This means that kBT has to be smaller than E square over 2 times the capacitance of the dot. And as a rule of thumb, this charging energy is generally taken to be larger than 10 times kBT, just to be safe, so that electrons cannot be thermally tunneled into the quantum dot or out of the quantum dot. Because if the electrons have enough energy to overcome this Coulomb blockade barrier, they can tunnel into the quantum dot, and you'll be fooled because you would like to make a single electron transistor. When you're dealing with single electrons, you have to really carefully control your system so that there is no noise, there are no unwanted effects. And generally temperature has a deleterious effect on your devices. It fights against control. Temperature is what makes energy unusable. So you would like to, thermal energy, as you know, is disordered. So you would like to prevent yourself from this disordered energy. So the first condition that you need to satisfy is that your charging energy has to be greater than your thermal energy. Okay? So is it easier to satisfy this condition if the temperature is high or low? Low. So generally these single electron devices work at low temperature. And is it advantageous to have a small capacitance or a high capacitance? It's advantageous to have a small capacitance. So if you have a quantum dot which is spherical, the capacitance of such a quantum dot is generally given by, say, some factor that is close to 1 or 10, like 2 pi. The permittivity into diameter. So would you like a smaller diameter or a bigger diameter of quantum dot? You would like a smaller diameter for the quantum dot, because then the capacitance will be high. The capacitance will then be small. The capacitance will be small, the charging energy will be high. The second condition that you would like to be satisfied is that the uncertainty in energy has to be less than the charging energy. Now I would like to explain what this really means. You have a charging energy, EC, given by this. Now it's a quantum system, so there has to be some uncertainty in the energy. Okay? Now if the energy is so uncertain, if the uncertainty is so large that it becomes of the same order as the charging energy, then the charging energy is good as nothing. For example, if you had some masons who were building up a beautiful brick wall, and you would require that all the bricks should be of perfectly length half a foot. Okay? So you have bricks and all of them have the same length, half a foot. And you ask the mason to build this wall. You would need to provide the mason with a measuring instrument that can measure up to half a foot. Okay? So that the mason can sort out the bricks which you would like to use and which you wouldn't like to use. If you provide the mason with a measuring instrument that has an uncertainty of half a foot, then it's good as nothing. The mason will never be able to build that wall. Okay? Or if you are in an amusement park. Now I didn't want to give the example of amusement parks because they don't exist in Pakistan, but they exist abroad. If you are in an amusement park and you would like to take a roller coaster ride, now generally you have a sign of a red line. Any child who's taller than the red line is allowed to sit onto the roller coaster. Okay? Now if that red line was very broad, say it was 2 feet broad itself, then that red line cannot ensure that children of the correct height are sitting on the roller coaster, and you cannot ensure that the children will be safe. So your measuring instrument has to have an uncertainty which is small as compared to what you require. In other words, your uncertainty in energy should be smaller than the capacitance, than the charging energy. Otherwise, electrons will tunnel into and out of the quantum dot with their own free will. So you would like to have the charging energy to be large and the uncertainty in the charging energy to be small. Now the uncertainty in the energy, delta E, as we know from the uncertainty principle, delta E, delta T is of the order of say h over 2. Right? Let's use this approximate expression, which means that delta E is of the order of h over 2 delta T. Now what delta T should I use for this capacitor? I have to use some delta T. So the more I look at the capacitor, the longer I look at the capacitor, smaller will be the uncertainty in the energy. In other words, if the charge on the capacitor remains there for a longer period of time, smaller will be the uncertainty in energy. It's just like a decaying atom. So you do not want the charge to decay. Now if charge is stored on the capacitor, the charge is going to go away, it's going to leak away, it has to be discharging. So what's the characteristic time scale that I should use? It should be large one, but what is the characteristic time scale for a capacitor that is being charged or discharged? Remember our class from Friday? It's going to be RC, which is the typical time constant. So this delta E has to be of the order of h over 2 R C dot, where R, I put a T with it, RT is a tunneling resistance. It's not the same ohmic resistance, it's a tunneling resistance. So what I would now like is the delta E, which is h over 2 RTC, is smaller than the charging energy, which is E square over 2 C dot. Which means that the tunneling resistance has to be greater than h over E square. If I just manipulate this inequality a little bit, this is what I get. In quantum mechanics, the resistance is also quantized. This is a unit of resistivity. It's called the resistivity quantum, 26 kilo ohms. So you have to satisfy two conditions. The first condition is given by this. This is the Coulomb blockade condition, and this is the minimum tunneling resistance condition. If these two conditions are satisfied, you can choose when the electron will tunnel in and when it will tunnel out. It will be at your disposal. There will be no unwanted effects, no noise to deal with. Okay, so tunneling will always be on purpose. Now, how does tunneling take place? I have to finish. Just give me 5 minutes, please. Bakar, I know you have really poignant questions, but just hold on to them for a minute. Now, how does a single electron transistor really work? We have a source. So inside the source, we have a Fermi energy. The source is a metal. So electrons are filled up to the Fermi energy. This is the source. This is the drain. In the drain, we also have a Fermi energy. And since the source and the drain are of the same material, these Fermi energies are of the same kind. So electrons are filled up to here. Now, in between the source and the drain, we have our quantum dot. And we know that the energy levels of the electrons are quantized inside the quantum dot. And this barrier is the Coulomb blockade barrier. Okay? This barrier is the Coulomb blockade barrier. Now suppose that there is an energy level inside the quantum dot for the electron that is coincident with the Fermi energy. Okay? Now the question is, if you have an electron at this point, can it tunnel into this level? What's going to happen to the energy of the system? Say the energy of the Coulomb dot. Is it going to increase or decrease? Increase. Because once an electron has been added to the Coulomb dot, to the quantum dot, all of these energy levels will be shifted upwards by the amount E square over 2c, because this is the charging energy. So what's happening is that the electron would like to tunnel into the quantum dot, but when it tunnels into the quantum dot, the energy of the quantum dot goes up. But that is not favorable. Tunneling cannot happen in such a situation. That is, you are tunneling into a classically forbidden region and the energy of the system is going up. That's not allowed. That's against the conservation of energy. So you can tunnel into a region such that your energy remains constant, or it can decrease. So it's not favorable to tunnel into a classically forbidden region and increase your energy. You would like to keep the energy constant, because energy has to be conserved. So even though this tunneling can hypothetically take place, it doesn't take place, because once the electron has tunneled into the quantum dot, the energy of the quantum dot should go up. All of these quantized energy levels should shift upwards, but that is not allowed. Therefore, what's going to happen is, in other words, an electron that is to tunnel into the quantum dot has to pay its price. There is a price tag. It has to pay the toll tax to enter the quantum dot. It has to pay a certain price. Now, if it has to pay the price to enter a classically forbidden region, then that's not a worthwhile deal. So the electron would decide not to pay a price and yet be in a classically forbidden region. So what is going to happen is, first of all, you apply a positive potential to the drain. In other words, you make this positive, you make this negative, which means that the drain Fermi level goes down. All the energies inside the drain go downwards, because an electron is seeing a positive potential inside the drain. So the energy that the electron sees is favorable inside the drain. So first of all, what's going to happen is, nothing happens to the source. The drain is going to move down. This is the Fermi energy in the source, the Fermi energy in the drain, and nothing happens to the quantum dot. Still, an electron cannot tunnel into the quantum dot, because it has to pay too heavy a price. Its energy is going up by E square over 2c. However, if now a gate voltage is applied, such that this gate voltage is positive, what's the effect of this positive gate voltage on the energy levels inside the quantum dot? Anyone? नीचे आ जाएगा, ठीक है? This gate voltage, positive gate voltage, will pull down these energy levels downwards. Because it's a positive voltage, the electron favors to be in a positively charged region. So all of these quantized energy levels will be pulled downwards. So let me make the new energy diagram. First of all, could you please tell me what's this energy difference going to be?
1 over 2
It's going to be the difference in voltages between the source and the drain. Okay? It's going to be E times Vd minus Vs. Now what's happening is that all of these energy levels are pulled downwards. So let me first draw the Fermi energy level. This is the source, this is the drain. Now this fourth energy level is coming downwards, the third is coming downwards, the second is coming downwards, the first is coming downwards. All of these energy levels are being pulled like curtains, pulling down the curtains. You're bringing these energy levels down. So this energy level comes below the Fermi level. All of these energy levels are brought downwards. Now does it become favorable for the electron to tunnel in this Coulomb blockade? Yes. Only if it can pay the price for it. If this energy level is brought downwards by this much, E square over 2c, then the electron can pay the price. Because this downward transition of the energy level is being affected by the gate voltage. So if this gate voltage is such that VGE, which is the amount by which this energy level comes downwards, if this VGE equals E square over 2c, then an electron can tunnel in from this region into this energy level, and when it tunnels in to this energy level, the quantum dot increases its number of electrons by just 1. Okay? And when the electron has tunneled in, the energy of the overall system goes back up again. Okay? And when the energy of the overall system goes back up again, these energy levels raise up by the same amount. So they raise up and they come back to this position. And the upward transition now again is E square over 2c. And so the total energy is conserved. And this electron that has now moved into this level can now tunnel into across this Coulomb blockade barrier and reduce its energy, because that's favorable, that can happen. So in this way, at a precise voltage of Vg equals E over 2c, an electron is tunneled into the quantum dot and out of the quantum dot. And when the original situation is recreated, another electron can tunnel into the quantum dot. So at any one time there is one electron inside the quantum dot if Vg equals E over 2c. Vg can also be greater than E over 2c. So if I would like to make a plot between the gate voltage and the current, the current is zero everywhere. Only at when the gate voltage is E over 2c dot, I get a spike in current. And then the current goes to zero again. When I apply a voltage of 2 times E over 2c dot, I get another spike in current. And each spike is from a single electron. I increase the gate voltage further, I get another spike in current. In between these regions, the current is zero. There is no flow of electrons. So I am controlling when a current flows. And inside this region, between E over 2c and 2E over 2c, if I plot the number of electrons, there is only one electron here. If I plot with N, with blue, the number of electrons is one electron in this region. And in this region there are 2 electrons inside the quantum dot. In this region there are 3 electrons at one time inside the quantum dot. And here you can observe that the current has become quantized. And this is the ultimate form of a single electron transistor. Now I would like to ask you, would you like to take a quiz or not?
No.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Tomorrow there's not going to be a quiz, so I have to readjust, I have to make an average. I think we have to take a quiz.
Yes.
It will be helpful in your final exam.